Hi, Crime Junkie jury. I'm Lauren Conlin, and this is your daily Diddy Digest. I am in a different location right now. I had a family trip planned, so I did have to leave court a little bit early, but I wanted to get into the defense's closing argument that was done by Mark Agnifilo. But before I do get to that, I want to just say that the jury charges and all of the exhibits that will happen on Monday. So the jury charges were not read today. That will happen Monday, and then the jury will start their deliberations. So Mark Agnifilo's closing, it was a lot different than Christy Slavik's closing. I mean, he spoke to the jury like they were friends. He was very casual at first, and he really thanked them for their service, for their time, praised them, and then he got into things. So the first thing that he said was, this trial, this is a tale of two trials told by the mouths of witnesses, text messages, videos, and evidence. Now, the second trial, this is different. This is told by the mouths of the prosecutor. Nothing like the trial that's told by the evidence. And then he went on and on about how this is a completely exaggerated case. You know, this is a racketeering charge, the most complicated and largest criminal act, racketeering, and the government is charging my client with this based on personal drug use and threesomes. And he actually said the words at one point, "Are you kidding me?" And he said at one point, you know, does that mean that every hotel room that Sean Combs took one of his girlfriends to, this was a federal crime scene? And then he talked about how all of the witnesses on the stand, or many of them, spoke about how much they loved Diddy, how inspiring he was, and how, you know, they learned so much from him. You know, he cited Derek Ferguson, the CFO, who went to Harvard Business School, UPenn, and he said, you know, this type of guy actually got up on the stand and worked, by the way, for Bad Boy Enterprises for 20 years and talked about how he learned from Diddy. And, you know, he said, like, this Bad Boy, Combs Enterprises, these are legitimate businesses, and the government is trying to say that this is a racketeering conspiracy. And that's, again, when he said, "Are you kidding? This is ridiculous." And he talked about the HSI raid, and he was very sarcastic. And he's like, you know, the search warrant and from HSI, thank goodness, you know, you saw all those boxes of Astroglide they took. Wow, the streets are so much safer without all that Astroglide. Look at the baby oil they seized. And at one point he goes, "Congratulations, HSI, you got 5 Valium pills." And you know, some of the male jurors were actually laughing at this. And he also went to start talking about Diddy's character. He said, look, 6 of his 7 children are here. And they were. The only child that wasn't there was his baby, who's about 3 years old, I believe. And then he said, you know, when he takes care of people, he takes care of his children. And Jane is getting her rent paid for. She's sitting in a house right now paid for by him. Points to Diddy. And then he says, is that coercion? Let's see, what else? He then gets to Cassie, and he basically says that this case is about money. It started with Cassie's lawsuit, and then that none of the witnesses called law enforcement. Nobody invited the government into these hotel rooms. No one called 911. They called civil attorneys. And then he said that Cassie only sued for $30 million because she knew that he had the money. And he went on to say that the word love was mentioned 881 times throughout this trial because there was so much love between a lot of these people and Sean Combs, and it was complicated. And he went on to say that Cassie and Sean Combs were so in love, but obviously it was complicated, and that we should all see their breakup texts because we will cry, and they were all in evidence. So he implored the jury to look at the breakup texts, and he also talked about, you know, the domestic violence and said Sean Combs, he owns the domestic violence. He is guilty of that, but he is not charged with that. That is not racketeering. And he said, you know, you should listen to Cassie, because Cassie actually made a statement after the CNN video was released, or the Intercontinental video was released, on her Instagram, and she said, "Thank you for the love and support. Domestic violence is the issue." And then he went on to say, well, Cassie could have said, having coerced sex is the issue. Running away from freak-offs is the issue. But she didn't. She didn't say sex trafficking is the issue. She said domestic violence is the issue. And then he said, we should all listen to Cassie. Believe Cassie. And then he talked about how horrible it must have been for her and how bad it was. But then he said, Cassie Ventura is nobody's fool. She was Mr. Combs's quote-unquote match. And he kind of said, she knows what she wants in the bedroom. And also, he actually said something about her being gangsta, or she kept it gangsta. And he was talking about Kid Cudi because she had a burner phone. And, she apparently got a second hotel room that she testified about to keep this burner phone in. And he kind of said, yeah, if you got a burner phone, there's a good chance that you had to think about that and you probably shouldn't have gotten it. Agnifilo talked about how Cassie knew what she was doing and how she wouldn't have come clean about Kid Cudi unless Sean Combs caught her. And that's exactly what happened. So let's see. All right. So he got into some of the RICO predicates. He went a little bit out of order, but he got into the kidnapping with Capricorn Clark, and he went hard on her. He said that she was a little bit off. He's like, seems like a really good person, but she's a little bit off. And, he's like, I feel horrible for her because she mentioned that both of her parents died on the stand, but like, did any other witnesses say that? Stuff like that. And then he got into the whole kidnapping with the polygraph, how she had to go take this polygraph for 5 days straight. And he was just like, so what is this, a door-to-door kidnapping? She was picked up by Paul Offord security every day, brought to the building and went home. And he just said this doesn't meet the New York requirement for kidnapping because force wasn't used. And he also said, I don't even know if Sean Combs knew about this because he was on Broadway during this time. He was doing A Raisin in the Sun. He was spearheading the Vote or Die campaign, and he was running all of his quote-unquote legitimate businesses. He wasn't checking in on Capricorn Clark. And Agnifilo also said, she had told other people on the staff, and this is part of her testimony, that when this jewelry went missing that she had to take a polygraph for, she told them to lock everybody up and question them until they got an answer. So he's like, this is her idea. And then he said, why would prosecutors charge him with kidnapping? That's just not a thing here. And there was an objection during this, not during his actual argument, but when there was a break, Maureen Comey objected to two things there. She said, number one, we didn't charge him with kidnapping. We charged him with racketeering. That's just a predicate. Number two, the jury is not meant to speculate on the nature of the charges, which is what he invited them to do. That's not a thing. So she wanted the jury to be told some instructions by the judge to disregard this. And he ended up doing this. And this happened a couple times with things that Agnifilo said throughout his closing argument. And the other thing that he kind of got scolded on this, and the judge had to give instructions, is he said that Cassie's beating at the Intercontinental was a misdemeanor, and Comey said that he was misstating the law. And he said, look, I was just trying to say that this should have been a state charge and not a federal charge. And so the judge, again, he didn't say anything about that because Agnifilo said he was going to tie it all together. But later, he had to give another instruction to the jury because Agnifilo said that Sean Combs was targeted. And there was just, there was a lot, I think, that he was kind of pushing the limit on, but he got his point across. Let's just say that. So, the second instance of Capricorn Clark and her kidnapping, he had talked about how, with the Kid Cudi situation, she talked about a gun being present, and she never mentioned a gun on the phone to Kid Cudi and Cassie when she called them, and that would have been very important to tell them because, she would be very scared, and Kid Cudi on the stand made no mention of a gun. He's like, also, Capricorn Clark testified, or we saw text messages that said she had a crush on Sean Combs at one point, so he wouldn't need a gun to take with him to get her to come with him. That was just not a thing. And then he also said, she talked about calling Lauren London, when she was in the car and Diddy was inside Kid Cudi's house. And she told Lauren London she wanted to leave, but she was scared of the mountain lions, not of a gun. So, and then he switched into the arson thing really quickly. Again, going a little bit out of order because there was a third kidnapping here, or alleged kidnapping, but he switched into the arson, and he basically said, yeah, they want to throw this arson predicate out, and the investigation was so horrible, they didn't even do any further investigation after getting female DNA off of this bottle. And they, what did he say? He said that the glove in the back seat, that this investigator wasn't going to show us this glove at all in pictures. He had to ask about this glove. So overall, it was a terrible investigation. And so you don't know for certain if Mr. Combs was responsible for this. Back to the third kidnapping, he said that it was Cassie at the London hotel after a beating. She had to go there and recover. He claimed that Cassie, and he showed Cassie's testimony where she said she wanted to recover at Diddy's house. And he's like, why would she want to recover at the person whose house kidnapped her? That doesn't make any sense. And during Maureen Comey's rebuttal, she countered a lot of this stuff. And she said she wanted to go recover at her mom's house. And they said no. She's like, so that was kidnapping. And yeah, he said it didn't meet the California law of kidnapping because there wasn't forced use. And Cassie said, D-Rock took her there, or one of the security guards took her there. And then he said that the bribery charge doesn't hold up because in order for it to technically and officially be bribery according to the law, the conspirator has to promise a bribe to a person about to be called as a witness or go to law enforcement in a case. And he said there was no law enforcement that were involved in the intercontinental video exchange with Eddie Garcia. And he said, and also he said the NDA. He said the government did not show the part of the NDA with the exclusions of this non-disclosure, saying that, this guy can do whatever is required of him if he is approached by law enforcement. And then as far as witness tampering and obstruction, that was Mia and Jane. And he said that, Mia, the government didn't show when Mia said she was out of Skrilla to D-Rock, meaning money, and that's why D-Rock offered her money. He said the government's going to make you dig for this evidence. No, D-Rock didn't just offer Mia money. She said she didn't have any. So that's not obstruction. And then as far as Jane goes, he kind of said, yeah, those audio messages didn't sound great, but Mr. Combs was worried about another civil suit, not a federal investigation. He said a federal investigation didn't start until later. This is on the heels of Cassie's lawsuit. He just didn't want to deal with another another civil suit. So that is pretty much as far as there's another one. Okay, sorry. Forced labor. So he talked about Mia and her sexual assault because the government had said that she was, this was forced labor because of sexual services. And he said, no. He said, this clearly wasn't an assault because there are kind of threatening text messages from Diddy to Mia when she wasn't responding to his messages or calls when he was, she was in South Africa with Cassie. He said, if you don't call me back, I'm going to tell Cassie everything. I'm paraphrasing, but that's along the lines of his text message. And Agnifilo said, why would he threaten that if it was an assault? Like, why would he put himself out there? Like, it was it was something they were doing and he was going to tell Cassie because Mia was friends with Cassie. So he's like, that was not an assault and it was not forced labor. And then he switched to a picture that Mia had posted on Instagram with it was a bunch of people from Combs Enterprises and Bad Boy and a bunch of Diddy's family members. And Mia was in the picture and she was super happy. And Agnifilo was like, see that right there, folks? He's like, that's the racketeering conspiracy enterprise. And he was just like, that's the RICO right there, guys. That's the enterprise. And it was very, very sarcastic. But that is as far as I went for the defense's closing statement. He really honed in again on the different aspects of the relationship with Jane and Cassie, and how this was a certain lifestyle, it wasn't trafficking, and how it was just really an overreach by the government. And of course, during Comey's rebuttal, I mentioned a few things, but she just said, like, this is trafficking. He forced Jane to have sex between throwing up. This is trafficking. She just was not playing around. So the jury charges will be read Monday, and they will begin their deliberations. So I will do another update either Monday or Tuesday, just to let everybody know what's going on, because it's difficult in federal court. I mentioned you can't have your phone. So I'm not certain how it's going to go here. We actually put our names on a list. It was somebody who runs the federal courtroom. They said, let me put your name on this list, and if there's a verdict, we can send an email out to let everyone know a verdict is coming. But they can't do that necessarily about notes to the jury or to the judge from the jury. So we'll see. So anyway, you'll hear from me next week, either Monday or Tuesday. But thanks for listening, Crime Junkie.